Distinguished members of the press, now we will have the press conference of the President of the Government of the Republic of North Macedonia, Dimitar Kovachevski, and the Prime Minister of Ireland, Mr. Leo Varadkar. Now I invite the Prime Minister Kovachevski to address us. Distinguished Mr. Varadkar, distinguished citizens, distinguished members of the press, it is my pleasure to host today the Honorable Prime Minister of Ireland and dear friend Leo Varadkar. At our last bilateral meeting in Granada in October last year, I invited my colleague Varadkar to visit North Macedonia. And I would like to welcome him in Skopje and to thank him for accepting my invitation to be the first Prime Minister of Ireland who has paid a visit to the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of North Macedonia. This year we are marking 30 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations with Ireland, and despite being geographically distant, from 1994 until today we have developed a good level of political dialogue. And that is why I would like to welcome our distinguished ambassador of Ireland and the delegation that accompanies the Prime Minister. We agreed with the Prime Minister that we should achieve more in our economic cooperation. We have more opportunities for cooperation, especially in the field of information technology, telecommunications, organic food production, energy, and tourism. Our exchange might not be on a very high level as compared to other geographically more closer countries. However, it is valuable, especially since Ireland imports agricultural products from our country and we import products from the pharmaceutical industry and telecommunications. Our meeting was excellent. We discussed the European integration of North Macedonia. Ireland is a strong partner and supporter of our European integration, and we value it highly. I'm free to say that Ireland is one of the most vocal supporter of the European integration of North Macedonia, especially Prime Minister Leo. And on every meeting we've had in Brussels, he is one of the greatest friends of our country. And today he is paying a visit to our country. During the Irish presidency of the European Union, we submitted our application for membership in the Union, and as of then, we received vocal support from Ireland, which views the enlargement as a strategic and security concern. Ireland is a country we can learn a lot from, a country in which unification for essential interests of the country is always a priority. As one of the first 3 countries to join the European project back in 1973, EU membership has been a positive driving force for social and political changes in Ireland. Ireland is a true example of a country that has experienced economic and social transformation, benefiting from membership in the European Union, and has demonstrated this in the past 50 years of membership. The numbers speak best for what was achieved by Ireland. All of us who are in politics and, of course, the media, know very well that if certain country was economically quite developed after joining the EU, then this is Ireland. I'm glad that today with the Prime Minister we talked about our European future, about our perspectives, about the negotiations that we have started, about the completing screening process, and about the conclusions of the European Council from December, when EU called on North Macedonia to speed up the completion of the constitutional amendments in order to move forward in the EU accession process. What we talked about is progress of reforms, implementing projects, about our specific steps along the European path. And we did not talk about the fact that all this should happen in the future, because this process has already started and it is not something that will end. In the past period, after commencing the negotiations, we have continuously received full confirmation of our commitment to the European future. We also have the confirmation that our efforts to protect both the Macedonian language and the Macedonian identity have results today. And we can be sure that our citizens the future generations will live in the EU proud to be Macedonians with their heads held high, with Macedonian language and with Macedonian identity. When I say that this process will not end, I mean the process of reforms that have started. The reforms will continue. There is no force in our country that can prevent the accession of the country to the European Union because there is no other alternative. And this process will be finished with the membership of North Macedonia into the European Union during the mandate of the following government 2024-2028. It will be again a pro-European government that will lead the country to the European Union. It is Ireland that understands best that identity and language are two important features for any nation, and the Irish know very well what challenges we face because they too, in other circumstances and at another time, went through such a similar process. This government made many difficult decisions and showed vision, leadership, and courage because those difficult decisions mean a better, richer future, a better standard of living for the citizens, and they mean an opportunity for our future generations to live in an EU member state, but instead of being in another country, it should be here at home in North Macedonia. From that momentous July of 2022 onwards, both we and the EU are meeting and delivering our promises. The next step remains. The decision, of course, will not be easy, although a technical one, but it will be a decision that will enable a better future for future generations, for us and for our children. A better standard of living, a functional rule of law, better infrastructure, better services for the citizens, accelerated economic progress, social justice, and the rule of democracy. A better life according to European standards. If someone wants to compare what a country is before joining the EU and what it means after joining the EU, then they should take Ireland, for example, and to compare the country before and after joining EU. It is the case with all the countries that have joined the EU. I mentioned Ireland as a great example of what I'm saying, and I always say that full-fledged membership in the EU is our goal, and we have no other alternative. There's no substitute for the EU membership. All other alternatives that are being offered are, in fact, utopia. They cannot give the same results that the EU membership can give. Whether we will reach that goal now depends only on us here in North Macedonia. As we discussed with my colleague, Varadkar, in this complex and uncertain geopolitical context for the European continent, the future of the country should be the top priority above all political and ideological differences. It is also important in regional context because the positive examples and progress of a country also mean the development of the region, and in that direction we discussed that a peaceful and safe Western Balkans is in the interest of both the region but also of Europe as a whole. The world is going through turbulent times. The Russian military aggression in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, these are all events that put difficult and responsible decisions before us as leaders, both to condemn the violence and to actively support our partners and friends. But above all, decisions that will mean preservation of peace and stability on European soil for the sake of progress, for the sake of a better future for all of us. In the end, I would like to extend my appreciation and gratitude for the visit and to wish us further and accelerated development and progress of the Macedonian-Irish relations. And once again, gratitude for the support I have experienced in the past 2 years, given by Prime Minister Varadkar and his team, and the support that Ireland provides on all meetings in Brussels to the Republic of North Macedonia. Thank you. Now we will hear the statement of the Prime Minister of Ireland, Leo Varadkar.
And thank you very much, Prime Minister, and allow me to say what an honour it is to be the first Irish Prime Minister, the first Irish Taoiseach to visit North Macedonia in official capacity. When I met with the Prime Minister in Granada in Spain last autumn during a meeting of the European political community, he extended an invitation to me to come and visit this beautiful country. I'm really glad I had the opportunity to do so, and only sorry that it's been such a short visit. But I do intend to come back and spend a little bit more time getting to know the region a bit better once I have a chance. My visit with my delegation today to North Macedonia and earlier to Kosovo and Montenegro shows Ireland's interest and commitment to this region and our determination to help North Macedonia and its neighbours on their path towards EU integration. Joining the European Union should be a national ambition and not a party political matter. And certainly for us, when we joined the European Union, there was a strong political consensus in favour of doing so. I believe it's also really important for regional security in the Balkans, but also for Europe's wider security, particularly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has given new impotence and urgency to enlargement. We want to see the people of North Macedonia and the wider region benefit from EU membership, just like Ireland did after joining more than 50 years ago, as the Prime Minister said. We've always supported EU enlargement. Indeed, Ireland was part of the first ever EU enlargement. And we look forward to welcoming North Macedonia as a future member state and hope to see accelerated progress on the accession negotiations. No new country has joined the European Union for more than 10 years now, and that is too long in my view. So we stand ready to help in any way we can, particularly in implementing reforms. The European Union has transformed Ireland over the past 50 years and brought really big economic and other benefits to our society. And we're more than happy to share our experience and knowledge with your government during the negotiations and the accession process. In our meeting today, we also discussed bilateral relations between Ireland and Macedonia, which are very warm, but there's also a need, I think, for much further development of relations between the two countries. Trade between our two countries was just €20 million last year, and I believe we can grow this trade and develop closer cultural, educational and social links, as well as tourism too. Political stability in North Macedonia is important to Europe. On our own island of Ireland, we've experienced the devastation that conflicts between communities can bring. And equally, we witnessed the great benefits arising from a successful peace process. So my visit to Montenegro, to Kosovo and to North Macedonia this week has given me a clearer view of the challenges facing these countries, both externally and internally. And I leave with a much better understanding of the importance for Ireland and our EU partners to strengthen our assistance in the region. So thank you very much, Prime Minister, to you and your team for the very warm hospitality extended to me and my delegation during our meeting. And it has been a privilege to finally get a chance to visit your country.
Thank you. Now we will have questions from the media. Alpha TV. Good afternoon. Alex Andriana from Alpha TV. Question for both Prime Minister. First for the guest. Good afternoon, Mr. Varadkar, and welcome. Did you discuss with your Macedonian colleague regarding the issue that North Macedonia has with the corruption? We have a serious problem with corruption and suspicions for involvement of high officials in scandals. It is a serious problem. What advice would you give as a Prime Minister on this matter, on the fight of corruption and tackling corruption? Also for Prime Minister Kovachevski, you may also give an answer. How should we fight the corruption?
I'll go first, if that's okay. But we didn't have a detailed discussion on corruption, but we did discuss it as part of our conversations. And I think the Prime Minister pointed out very fairly that corruption can happen in any country, indeed happens within the European Union, so it's certainly not unique to any particular country or any particular jurisdiction. But I think the main thing is to pursue prosecutions and secure prosecutions, because that sends the message to people who might engage in corruption that they won't succeed. And I think that's the most important thing that has to be done. And I know that's being done in this country in a number of cases. But I think it's also important that we, as members of the European Union and people coming from Western Europe, acknowledge the fact that corruption can happen in our countries too, and even within the European Union itself. So it always is an ongoing battle. It's not a battle that is just about joining the European Union. It has to continue constantly, really.
Fight against corruption is a never-ending fight. it always has two elements. First, to identify it, and what you underline, that there is corruption, means that the corruption is visible. And the second element is, of course, the prosecution by the competent authorities, and to prosecute the perpetrators of illicit actions. Corruption can be found everywhere, even in the European Parliament. You know that in the European Parliament, high officials were identified regarding the World Football Cup. They were identified and persecuted. The system allows independent prosecution of identified perpetrators, and we have institutions that are not part of the government, but they are independent from it. Now we'll continue.
Jack Barr from the Irish Times. Just a question for the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar in relation to Israel and the International Court of Justice. I suppose, how would you respond to Israel's defence today that the court has no basis to make an order for a ceasefire? And if South Africa does succeed in the court, would the Irish government regret not joining the case? And then just very briefly, a second question in relation to the public pay talks, if you might comment on the unions turning, not going for the 8.5%, and is that disappointing? And can the state be expected to move much further on that? Thanks.
Yeah, I think maybe to take that first, the second question first. I am very disappointed that the talks between the government and the public sector unions have broken down. Spoke to Mr. Dunne about it only yesterday, and we want to come to an agreement, as we always have in the past, with public sector unions on pay increases for the next year or two. Crucially, any agreement we come to has to be adequate, has to be affordable, and also has to involve reform. So adequate to give our public servants the pay increase that they deserve and need, also has to be affordable for the Irish taxpayer, and also has to involve reforms and changes in work practices and productivity so that citizens get better services for the higher costs that they may have to pay through their taxes. But it's an agreement that I think can still be made. Bear in mind, these are our nurses, our Defence Forces members, our Gardaí, our teachers, our civil servants, our local authority workers. The offer that was put on the table of 8.5% or 12% for the lowest paid workers, I think was a good offer. But what will now happen is the WRC will engage with government and engage with unions and see if there's a basis against which we could then resume the talks and come to an agreement, and that I think would require some degree of flexibility from both sides. Just on your first question, as you'll be aware, Ireland is pressing for a ceasefire between Hamas and the Israeli Defence Forces in Gaza. We've been pushing for that from very early on this conflict, one of the first countries to do so. We're using our influence at the UN with the US and at the EU to press for that, and that's a position that we continue to hold. As I said before, I do genuinely think we need to be careful about the use of the term genocide and accusations of genocide. We know that the Jewish population in Europe was subjected to genocide. 2/3 were killed, 6 million people, and the plan was there to kill the remainder. I don't think anyone doubts that that was genocide. And we know that what Hamas did in Israel was a terrible attack. 1,400 people killed because they were Jews or because they were in Israel. And Hamas, at least in its charter, talks about the destruction of Israel, and that speaks to a language of genocidal intent. It certainly could be argued. So we shouldn't forget that there are two or more parties to this conflict, and I think sometimes people have a tendency to forget that. But when it comes to the Genocide Convention, it's not just about determining whether or not genocide took place. It might take the court many years to make any sort of judgment in that regard. It can also be about the prevention of genocide, and it is possible that the Court of Justice may make some orders against Israel calling for it to desist in certain activities that might lead to genocide. And if it does that, I think that's where Ireland has a role to play. But I think at the moment we need to allow the case to happen and allow the arguments to be heard. But leaving all of that aside, I don't want there to be any doubt about Ireland's position on this. from day one, we condemned the attack by Hamas on Israel and the hostage-taking, but we've always said that the response has to be proportionate. We don't believe it has been proportionate, that Israel, if it has violated international humanitarian law, we believe it has, will have to be held accountable for that, and there are many mechanisms by which that can happen.
What role would Ireland play? You mentioned that yesterday as well.
Well, that's obviously something that we'll have to consider, but I don't want to prejudice the outcome of a case. And like I say, there are some people who are making out that this case is clear-cut. It's far from clear-cut. It may be many years before the court makes a ruling on whether genocide took place, and it may rule either way. But what it could do is issue an order, essentially calling on Israel to take certain actions to avoid genocide taking place, and we would, at that point, want to have a role in trying to make sure that happens. Of course, there's no mechanism by which ICJ rulings can be enforced, but I think it would strengthen the case for the UN, for the EU and others to take a stronger position on this.
Liam Nolan, RTE News. I have a question for Taoiseach as well. Taoiseach, I'd like to get your reaction to the airstrikes overnight by the United States and the UK on positions held by Houthi Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen. Do you think this could lead to an escalation of the current Israeli-Hamas war, given that the Houthi rebels are backed by Hamas ally Iran?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid what we are seeing is an escalation of the conflict. The current phase of this conflict began in Gaza, but we're seeing terrible violence against Palestinian people being perpetrated by extremist violent settlers in the West Bank. We're seeing clashes between Israel and Hezbollah over the Lebanese border, and we're now seeing these actions taking place in the Red Sea. So it's one of our greatest concerns is that this could escalate into a much more severe regional conflict involving players like Iran and others, for example. What's happening at the moment in the Red Sea, as you know, is that the Houthi rebels, which are backed by Iran, are attacking shipping vessels passing through that corridor, which is very important for world trade. And the UN resolution 2722 has called for that to stop, and it should stop. And I know that the US, the UK and others are going to take some, and have taken some military actions against Houthi targets, and the UN resolution notes their right to do so. But of course it's important that everything is done possible to avoid civilians being injured in this response.
Kalpit. A question for the Irish Prime Minister. If we take into consideration the European parliaments that should happen this year, is there space for changing of the negotiation framework for Macedonia? And whether the French-German proposal was reviewed on the last European Council?
I suppose I prefer not to get into the details of any of those negotiations or talks or proposals at this meeting. Really, my purpose in being here is to express Ireland's very strong support for North Macedonia's application to join the European Union. We want to see that happen as soon as possible. We believe it can happen. There will be a new European Parliament and there will be a new European Commission taking office this year. And I would like to see it happen in the mandate of the next Commission and the next Parliament, and I think that's possible. It's going to require a lot of work here in North Macedonia. It'll also require, I think, cooperation and assistance from other European countries. But certainly, I think I would like to see at least a number of countries joining the European Union in the period of the next Parliament and the next Commission. I think that would send a very strong message to all countries in the region that taking the steps towards a European path will be rewarded. We can't always be saying to countries that if you want to join the European Union, you have to do this, this and then not allow them to join. And I really think what's happened in Ukraine in particular must give more impetus and must allow us to accelerate the next enlargement. And that requires acceleration on both sides, acceleration of reforms in countries that want to join, but also a greater willingness of the European Union to accept new member states, particularly small member states that don't have a very large population, that I don't think would disrupt the budget or disrupt the voting system in the way a much bigger enlargement might.
Svetlana TV21, question to the Prime Minister, Mr. Kovachevski. Have you ever had talks with the former president of SDSM, Zoran Zaev, and whether during these talks did he insist or suggested maybe that at the following elections you should have joint lists with DUI? TV21, yesterday we had a reaction from the Social Democratic Union of Macedonia on a publication of yours with the former president of SDSM and with all former presidents of SDSM. I had the last communication for Christmas when we exchanged warm wishes. No, I answered you. Have you talked about the following elections? No, I answered you that the last communication with the former presidents of SDSM, with whom I'm a friend, were to exchange warm wishes for New Year's and Christmas. And the discussions in SDSM are led in the executive board in the party, where all media is always invited. So the motives for your articles will need to be found on another place. This is the end of today's press conference of both Prime Ministers. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you very much.